Hi everyone! Sorry, the K-pop Academia video is coming, trust me, but I do have a bit of a different video today. As you may have seen, today I uploaded the documentary I made this semester called Trains. I'm sure you can guess what it's about if you haven't already watched it. If you haven't watched it, I'd recommend you do because, well, who doesn't like trains, right? Anyway, I wanted to make a semi-behind-the-scenes video for Trains since I have a lot of reflections about the documentary making process. I also had to cut out a lot of the content we filmed, as is classic for filmmaking. So I wanted to talk a bit about some of the things I had to cut out and why, as well as the ways in which the film changed. Who knows, maybe you'll find it interesting even if you aren't someone who's into trains. If you aren't into trains, why are you here? So first, I'll talk about the original idea behind the documentary and how we ended up making a train doco, and then I'll talk about the story of us filming, including some reflections I had on becoming a train spotter for the weekend. I'll also talk about the editing process and how the concept of the film changed, including things I wanted to include but wasn't able to. And then I'll talk about my overall reflections from the project and any tips for anyone who wants to make a doco like this or something similar. I'll also include the full interviews at the end of this video. We recorded 6 interviews that were each like 10 to 15 minutes, so obviously a lot of things had to be cut out. But I still really appreciate the time that each interviewee spent with us, and a lot of them had interesting stories to tell and things to say, so I wanted to include them. The timestamp for that will be in the description too. So let's get started. Why am I making a train doco? So, as my channel description said, as I've mentioned several times in my videos, I'm a film student, and every semester, or once a year if you're doing a double degree like me, you have to do a film unit where you, what a shocker, make a film. This semester my film wasn't chosen, not because it was a bad idea, in fact lots of people really liked the idea, but because everyone who liked the idea was already in a different project and didn't have time for mine. Thus, I didn't have a crew, which was awkward but understandable. So I was put on a different project, but let's just say the project wasn't doing too hot, so I enlisted Kaisa and we decided to make a documentary. We originally wanted to make a documentary about hidden places in Sydney, but when organising dates we realised that our potential film dates nicely lined up with the Heritage Transport Expo, which I was already attending on Sunday anyway. Hence, trains. I've been a big train fan probably since before I could speak. The first toys I remember having were wooden train sets, and Thomas the Tank Engine was my life. Our local train station has a concourse where you can see the trains go past from above, and I remember being obsessed with standing there and watching the trains. And of course, I like old trains. Hence, I had been to the Transport Heritage Expo previously, before it got cancelled in ye old COVID times. So we decided to make our train documentary. Now, the first issue we had with the documentary was that neither of us had really used the university's cameras or microphones before. We usually had other roles which didn't involve these products, and even though we requested a workshop pre-filming, we didn't get one. So we were kind of figuring it out on the go. To make matters harder, I was given an FX6 camera with multiple lenses, which was an issue since as we were travelling I could only take one lens. This was an obvious issue since I couldn't zoom at all. On the day, we got to the expo nice and early, got our media passes, which we were thankfully provided by Transport Heritage New South Wales, and the sound on the camera didn't work. None of our microphones, including the camera's internal microphone, were registering sound, which was weird considering we literally checked them the day before and it was all fine. I knew it was something dumb that I'd done, but I couldn't for the life of me figure it out, even though I knew it would be a simple fix. And both Sony support and our university support are closed on weekends. I had one last hope. George's cameras at Town Hall, which I had been to with my mum several years previously and knew was open on weekends. I called them and they very nicely told me to bring the camera in, and a very nice man working there helped me with it. He figured out that the camera had somehow been switched to film in slow-mo, which doesn't record sound. Neither of us had any clue how I managed that. So, with a fixed camera, we went back to the expo and faced our second major issue, finding people to interview. We asked a lot of people if they were okay to be in an interview, but understandably, most people declined. I would have really liked to have interviewed some kids and families, and some of the train and bus drivers, but none of them were interested. Which, again, was understandable. The train drivers were on their break, and most families were probably just there to have a fun time, not to spend time in some random interview, but it was still a bit sad. In the end, we got to do 6 interviews like we wanted, which was good. We did face a few issues with getting the right shots and getting nice shots, but once the camera issue was fixed and we had some interviewees, it mostly went well. We also took a bus trip and took some videos of that, which didn't end up in the documentary. On the Sunday, I came in alone and had a few train trips booked. The S-Set trip to Lavender Bay and the Botany Freight Line route, so I took a bunch of B-roll, mostly out train windows on that day, and honestly had a great time. It was really fun being a train spotter for a few days, and a lot of people were really impressed with and complimented my obnoxiously large camera, which I was amused with. I also had a lot of fun chatting to people about trains, and really enjoyed the sense of community that I got out of it. Actually, speaking of being a train spotter, in the morning at Epping Station we were waiting for a Mariung to come through so I could take a shot of it, and since a freight train was coming, I thought, well, may as well take a video of it. And I guess the driver thought I was a train spotter waiting for him because he tooted me to say hi. Which I thought was very fun and made me very happy. And honestly, probably made that guy's day happier too, since he probably has a very monotonous job. Ah, the small joys of being a train spotter. Another interesting train spotter moment I had came on the way back from the botany trip. On the way out, I decided that I wanted to take a video of a diverging train line connecting with our train line, and a video of trains going under us when we were on a bridge. So I took out the map on my phone so that I could see where the next interesting landmark was. And when I started getting ready to film, the lady across from me also got excited and asked whether there was a special train coming. So I guess I was flattered that she'd think I was knowledgeable enough to know about a special train spotter app and whether a special train was coming or not. I also saw this guy Matthew, who is a fellow train lover and, dare I say, a mini celebrity, but I think I freaked him out by recognising him and yelling at him out a train window about how much of a fan of his I was. If he's somehow watching this, sorry, Matthew, I didn't mean to freak you out. If anyone who saw me filming on the day is watching this, I also want to apologise because, considering the seriousness of the camera I was carrying, I am nowhere near enough of a filmmaker or a train spotter to be worthy of that camera, and I was way too inexperienced to actually use the full power of said camera, resulting in far worse footage than they probably expected out of us. So sorry about that. I also want to mention that on the Sunday we went to have lunch at this Korean place called Yumko, which is right next to Mortuary Station and has an amazing view of the station. They also have very nice naengmyeon, and they have a mini banchan bar. As an absolute banchan fiend, 10 out of 10 would recommend. And with all of that done, it was time to edit. So, the original idea of the film was to make a poetic documentary about the joys of heritage trains, and to make it very atmospheric with an interesting soundscape. We wanted to film interviews in case we needed extra footage, and also because we thought it would be interesting to make a project about how different groups of people interact with heritage events in different ways. But in the end, the interviews became one of the most important parts of the film, partially because my inexperience with a camera made a lot of the shots come out very questionable and borderline unusable, and partially because the interviews were just really good. But my inexperience came in again because I ran the interviews like a psychology researcher, semi-structured, changing questions based on what they said, whereas I should have run it like a structured documentary and made sure I asked everyone the exact same questions in the same order for ease of editing. The fact that each interview involved different questions in a different structure, and the fact that I captured so little B-roll specifically relevant to what the interviewees were talking about, combined with the fact that most of my footage was just kind of mediocre, meant that editing was actually kind of a struggle. I'm serious when I say there was so little B-roll that was usable. The biggest issue with this, I think, is the fact that I filmed things that I personally was interested in. I love how the bookable train rides take you on non-commuter paths, so I really enjoyed taking videos out the train windows on the Botany Line and at Lavender Bay. But that was like me shooting my own personal vlog, not me shooting a film, and I just didn't get the footage needed for a film. For instance, I found it really interesting when we went past mountains of shipping containers and industrial sites. But literally no one in my interviews mentioned that, so it would have been weird to include it in the documentary. Thankfully, we were able to pad the footage out with some archival footage from Bennett Brook Railway, and I'm very thankful for their permission to use that footage. Another issue we had in editing was the lack of direction the documentary had. The problem is, I just like trains, and we filmed in a very exploratory manner, not so much a focused one, meaning that we didn't have a particular theme. Our unit convener suggested we talk more about the poetic philosophical beauty of heritage trains and steam power, and since I didn't really have a reason to say no to that, that's what we went for. I suppose it leans nicely into something many of my classmates wanted to see more of. Quote, crazy train people, a label that clearly includes myself. One difficulty I faced in this was balancing the unit convener's desire for me to elevate steam trains above all else, and my own love for all trains. For instance, he thought it would be appropriate for me to contrast steam trains and modern electric trains, but as much as I was pushed in that direction, I can't bring myself to write negatively about modern trains. Do I like heritage trains more than modern ones? Am I a V-set lover, not an A-set lover? Sure, but I like all trains, and I especially like the Mariungs compared to most of the new train sets, so I really wanted to avoid the suggestion that they were lesser than steam trains. Hence my line in the documentary about how even modern trains have their own unique charms and fan bases. I tried writing exactly as was suggested, but I felt like such a fake train fan to act like I didn't like electric trains, so I gave it a quick sneaky change. So that's how we ended up with a poetic in language but not in genre train documentary. The process of editing obviously meant I had to cut out a lot of things I wanted to include, a classic film process. The biggest thing I had to cut out that I wanted to include was the entire interview with the Jitterbugs. The Jitterbug Club is a swing and rock and roll dance club based in Sydney, and on the day they showed up to dance, since they'd heard that there would be various swing, jazz and rock and roll performances on throughout the weekend. I had a very nice interview with them where I learned a lot about what they do, and I felt that their dancing was one of those things that just really added to the atmosphere of the day, so was worth mentioning and showing. But through the editing process, I unfortunately had to cut both their interview and their dancing out of the documentary, as neither was relevant to what the doco turned into. I thought this was a big shame since they were our first interview of the day, and I was incredibly thankful that they talked to us, even though we were more focused on trains than dance. And in fact, the fact that I had to cut their section out of the doco was one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video, so that I could still showcase all of the interesting and great things they said, and so that I could fulfill my promise to them that I would promote swing dancing for them. I also really wanted to include Micah's interview where he talked more about his favourite heritage transport, including where he mentioned that one of the heritage buses present was his childhood bus. I thought this was a great interview moment and really expressed the nostalgia the event is known for, but I wasn't able to include anything about buses in the end, which also unfortunately meant that I had to cut out both the footage I took on a heritage bus ride and the video I took of a London bus which had somehow made it to Sydney for the weekend. The The final thing that I really wanted to include was a more in-depth narrated segment about the history of New South Wales's railways, from their origins in the 1830s and 1850s to their expansion, and the various sets of trains which have been produced over time. For instance, I wanted to contrast the different technology and priorities of the heritage steam engines and the newest set, the Marion trains, as well as the driverless metro, which would have been science fiction to people who rode these heritage trains in their heyday. But I had to cut all of that out because apparently it wasn't interesting. This is where my all-encompassing love of trains was potentially an issue, because I find everything about trains, no matter how seemingly mundane, interesting. So it was a bit hard for me to figure out which bits of information were good to include for a lay audience and which ones weren't. Related to the history of trains, I really wanted to mention something that I think is a super important but under-discussed aspect of our heritage transport and past in general. As I said in the documentary, steam trains have become symbols of Australia's industrial past and growth, as industrialisation has expanded outside of just Sydney. But just as they're a symbol of industrial growth, they're also a symbol of the oppression and dispossession of Indigenous people. They're often labelled as showing the, quote, expansion of civilization, but the expansion of civilization in Australia is just racist rhetoric labelling Indigenous people as uncivilised and justifying their removal from their communities as said communities are bulldozed to make way for trains and industry. Even beyond this displacement caused by white imperialism and industrialisation, trains were also used in the stolen generations to transport stolen children across New South Wales and separate them from their families. I think that, as heritage transport lovers, we're not immoral for liking trains which are symbols of the displacement of Indigenous people, but I do think it's important for us to acknowledge the negative impact they've had, hence why I wanted to mention it. But it definitely would not have suited the tone of the main documentary, so I wanted to mention it here, because I think it's worth being aware of and reflecting on. On a positive note, in 2022, Transport New South Wales added plaques to several train stations acknowledging the role that trains played in the dispossession of Indigenous people and in the stolen generations. And in even better news, the new Marions are named after the Darug word for emu, and their livery features artwork made by Indigenous artwork Leanne Mulgo Watson. The train's displays also periodically run an acknowledgement of country, which tells of Dreamtime stories of the emu running through the lands, and makes a reference to the Indigenous emu constellation, which is made up of the dark space between stars, not the white stars themselves. The acknowledgement of country lists the Indigenous countries which are the endpoints of the line, but also acknowledges the many countries in between. Even though I knew in advance that the trains displayed this, honestly the first time I saw it I cried. I can't really tell you why. I'm not Indigenous, and I know that this is just lip service, and this single acknowledgement of Indigenous culture doesn't in any way change how terribly they're treated in our country, but, I'm happy to see that it at least acknowledges Indigenous land and the many countries in the state, especially considering the role trains played in the stolen generations. So, a sleigh for the Marions. So now I want to talk about a few things I learned while making this film. Regardless of whether any of my viewers are themselves film students or not, I think this will be interesting to discuss, because I learned a lot about documentary filmmaking especially. This was my third proper film, and as I said, it was my first time using cameras and microphones myself. It was also my first time making a semi-traditional documentary, hence one of the reasons I learned so much. So first, I learned that if I don't know what I'm doing lens-wise, and especially if I only have enough space to carry one lens, it must be a zoom lens at all costs. I had so many shots that I thought were really nice, but they were just slightly soft on the focus or slightly out of frame because I only had one lens which only did so much. For instance, this shot of the Harbour Bridge emerging from behind trees on the Lavender Bay line. I was honestly pretty proud of myself for getting this shot, but there was nothing I could really do about the focus considering the lens. Also, it was shaky, but that's just how trains are. I also learned generally about camera work, exposure, and so on. Exposure was something I kind of ignored for many of my shots, and I really shouldn't have, because even though the mistakes that I made were mostly small enough to fix in post, I shouldn't have had to do that. On the bright side, zebras and focus peaking were very useful, would recommend. Having a monitor would probably have improved the quality a lot, but I mean, how would we have lugged a monitor around all day? I also learned a lot about camera work in general. I mean, I've always been that kind of director who has a pretty solid idea of the particular shots they need to get good coverage of a scene, but actually operating a camera, especially with a tripod, has made me a lot more comfortable with handling a camera. I guess practice makes experience? Duh. I think I also learned more about documentary filmmaking in terms of which shots I should get. I had this really fun idea in my head to get tons of B-roll out of train windows of the places trains go, but no one at the event really seemed to care about where the trains go, but rather the trains themselves, and I didn't capture much footage of the trains themselves. I also realised while editing that footage, just out train windows isn't very entertaining and gets repetitive quickly. So as much as I love my out the window shots, they had to go. I'll show a bunch over the rest of this segment since I like lots of them and think the various parts of the network we don't usually see are interesting. Speaking of, I wish I had captured more B-roll footage of things that the interviewees were specifically talking about. When editing, it makes the most sense to have someone talking, and footage of what they're talking about laid over that. For instance, when Micah was talking about the West bus, as you'll see later in this video, I was able to find that particular bus and take a shot of it. So, that fits well. But most of my B-roll was completely unrelated to what the interviewees talked about, which just made editing harder than it had to be. One thing I unfortunately didn't learn was how to change a DaVinci file from a regular wide ratio to a 4:3 ratio. I, clearly stupidly, started editing in wide and then tried to change it to 4:3 and couldn't for the life of me find out a way to do it in either the app or online without squishing my entire video down. All I wanted to do was crop. So hopefully this doesn't ruin any magic or anything, but yeah, that documentary's a fake 4:3. It was especially annoying because the reason I started editing in wide was because I wanted to switch between aspect ratios, like, for instance, P1 Harmony's Duh music video does. But Kaisa and I decided in the end that we just wanted to have the whole thing in 4:3, especially since it wasn't a poetic documentary anymore. And by then it was clearly too late. If anyone knows how I can fix this, well, it's too late for this film, but I'd greatly appreciate your advice before I make future films. The next things I learned were about audio. First, and probably most importantly, we plugged all of our microphones into the camera directly. On the bright side, this means that the camera automatically captured all sound and audio was automatically synced when I imported footage to DaVinci. On the downside, this meant that it was hard to isolate background sound versus interview sounds, and in interviews where there were multiple people, we sometimes ended up with one person being far quieter than the other, which led to different levels of sound quality when I had to raise the volume, and so on. If I were to remake the documentary or make another documentary, I would make sure we got some kind of sound recorder or mixer where each audio channel is recorded separately. I don't know enough about filmmaking to know exactly how to work that kind of device, but I would definitely want it. I think it would have made editing far easier. Next, I learned that Atmos is an absolute must. For those of you who haven't made a film, the idea with Atmos is that for every environment you film in, you should take 30 seconds worth of sound that is just nothing. No talking, no movement, no nothing. You can use this background sound to transition between shots better, and it would have been very useful to have to account for the huge differences in sound volume between interviews. In the end, I was able to make a kind of Atmos from tiny snippets of each interview where no one talked, but it was a pain. Atmos would have made my life infinitely easier. Speaking of, the next time I do a doco with interviews, I'm definitely taking more time on said interviews. I was so stressed about potentially wasting the time of each of the interviewees, who I was very, very thankful for, that I kind of rushed through each interview and wrapped them up and moved on faster than I should have. I should have taken more time to set everything up, make the shot nice, take Atmos, and so on. And I should have left blank space in between questions so I had more space to edit. Ah well, it's a learning experience, right? As far as the actual content of the film, I would say capture tons. I mean, I had tons, but most of it was pretty trash. So capture tons of good stuff. Duh. When editing, I also thought that it would have been nice to follow just one person or a group of people for a day, which in fact I did consider trying to do, but 1, I didn't want to potentially waste someone's time the entire day or weekend. 2, I wanted to contrast different people's thoughts on trains, and 3, we planned this documentary under such a time crunch that we barely even had time to get approval from Transport New South Wales and Transport Heritage New South Wales, let alone reach out to train spotters to ask them if they wanted to be involved. I think the entire documentary process from inception to completion probably lasted like 7 weeks, if that, bottom loaded in post-production. The short time frame of student films always bothers me, but that's just how life works, I guess. Of course, a constraint of the actual event was that it only lasted for 3 days, and we could only attend for 2 as we were at a different filming site on the Monday. But if you have the opportunity to, I would always say allow yourself extra film dates if you can. That's just normal film common sense. Finally, if you're doing what I did, i.e. record the dance and musical performances, make sure you record the whole thing. I don't know what I was thinking, but I often only recorded 15 seconds of each performance, if that, and neglected to record the end. This meant that we couldn't use the musical performances for any nice beats in the film, or any other times for finality. For instance, Kaisa and I loved the Radioettes' performance of Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, which you can see we included at the start of the documentary. But we really wanted to have a kind of cyclical ending and wanted to have the same song running over the end credits. Only in the end we couldn't, because yours truly was dumb and didn't record the end of the performance. And there was no way for it to be satisfying without the end. It made me feel very dumb. So with those hot tips, let me move into the final segment of this video. My thanks to people and the full interviews we recorded. I thought it would be a huge shame to miss some of the things these amazing interviewees said, so I wanted to make a full video with the full interviews, of course. But just before that, let me just say thank you to everyone who helped with and was involved in the documentary. Thank you to the people who watched the documentary and gave us feedback on it. Thank you to Bennett Brook Railway for giving us permission to use their footage. Thank you to all of our interviewees for letting us interview them. And thank you to Transport New South Wales for letting us film. But I do really want to give a massive thank you to Transport Heritage New South Wales, who were absolute champs in helping make this documentary. I emailed them before filming to see whether they'd be okay for us to film at the event, in case there were any restrictions for some reason. And they were great. Instead of just giving us permission to film, they gave us media passes for the weekend, which were seriously brilliant. People trusted us more and were happy to do interviews with us because of the media passes, and we were allowed to film on platforms because of the media passes, something that usually film crews aren't allowed to do. Something that was even better, even though we didn't actually make use of it, was that the media passes gave us the ability to go into other areas. For instance, even though Mortuary Station was closed outside of sold-out tours, we were allowed to enter the station and film because of the passes. The passes also meant that we had access to the volunteer lunchroom, which was extremely convenient and appreciated, considering we were able to leave our extra gear there. That was the moment where I was like, OMG, I'm so thankful we have these passes. The only issue with the passes was that they were another thing which gave us a greater air of authority than we actually had, which was just awkward for us. So with all of those thanks given, let me show you the full interviews I did in the order I did them. Thank you again to the interviewees.
Mind just introducing what you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want, we could do like a, you can.
If you can convince your group mates.
We kind of have to listen to her. So, yeah. We are the Jitterbug Club, swing and rock and roll dancers from Sydney, and we love everything to do with the 30s through 50s music, dancing, the transport, everything.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a bit about why you came to this specific event today? Any particular reasons?
We love dancing to live music, and the expo has done a great job at getting the sort of authentic feel from sort of the 30s and 40s to go along with the vintage trains, and it makes a really fun day out, sort of step back in time for the day.
And the train station floor is actually surprisingly good to dance on.
Yeah?
It's actually kind of nice. It's kind of fun, and like all the how high the ceiling is, just the environment. Yeah, it's nice. It's a good day.
It's a welcome change from dance studios. No, so they were hired separately, and then we were like, "Oh, you guys are playing, so let's come along." And we got in touch with the organisers.
So you planned it in advance, but it was a bit of a spontaneous in advance thing.
Yeah. And we were here last year and had a really good time, and so this year we encouraged more of the community to come as well. Yes, there is definitely the music changes depending on the decade, and so some people like certain types of music a little bit more. So from the early big band style through to your Elvis and Little Richard in rock and roll. So there's definitely people who have their preference and go to different events depending on that preference. But we like the 30s.
All four of you?
Time? Yes.
Yeah, I'd say
that up.
I'd say like 30s to 40s primarily. Yeah. And there's some like the occasional 20s like jazz Charleston song that is really fun for me, but yeah, I'd say mostly 20s and 40s.
We plan to be in front of the trains and have a look at them, but we didn't plan any trips because we're too busy dancing.
Yeah.
But we definitely had fun checking them out and having a look at them. Last year we did get into one of the trains just for a sticky beat, but we didn't go on any of the train tours or any of that. Yes, so we definitely like the heritage, the history in our dance. We reflect back on it a lot. We look at the old videos, we look at the old dances, how they were dancing, and then also what was happening in the community at that time, because it's what created our dance, was what was happening at the time. So in Australia we're a little bit removed from the swing history, because it is a African American black dance, which we don't have as much connection to down here, but it is really nice when we get events like this that we can connect with what it was like in Australia during those times, because there was dancing in Australia.
I think it's also it's not that well known of a dance. Like the amount of times I've tried to go to just random people and be like, yeah, so I do swing dancing in my free time, and just get a blank stare back. And so these kinds of events, like particularly the heritage ones where people actually watch us dance or are maybe exposed to it for the first time, they might not know what it is. And so it's a good way to get more people into a pretty niche community as well, which is kind of nice.
Do you find that you have an influx of people after these kinds of events then?
Yeah, definitely. And across the city, when more of these heritage events come up and all the local councils are supporting live music as well, then it tends to bring out that sort of historical element of our city, which is a lot of fun. And jazz is a really nice way to meet people and connect with each other in bars rather than sort of techno music. So we love it when they host live music.
It's fun, come do it.
Yeah, it's really like a combination of a multitude of different things that come together. So it's great exercise, the music's amazing. It's a really creative outlet, and something that people don't know is when we're dancing, it's not choreographed at all. It's lead and follow, and the follow has no idea what I'm going to do. It's like connection's really important. And it's also a really vibrant community, interesting people that you wouldn't usually meet. So it's like kind of a combination of a multitude of things that like really make it special. And richer, because we all have full-time jobs, and this is just a hobby outside, and it's enriched all of our lives.
Yeah, I only started it 8 months ago actually, so this is actually my first time at this event. So for me, it's really exciting, and I guess it's a way to like do something that you're interested in, and also to share it with the community, which I really like. So yeah.
Here today.
A husband that loves trains.
And because it's here every year, it's something special, and the amount of people that it draws is just great. So there's an interest there, basically.
Several times,
Yeah.
but not every year.
7 times?
Several.
Several.
Oh, okay. I was going to say 7's a lot. That's dedication.
Might be 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed you were watching the dancing. I don't know if that's been here every single
No,
year.
it hasn't.
Any thoughts on that?
I
Yeah.
thought it was a lovely fill-in, waiting for our train to start.
Yeah, that's true,
That's good. And they're very talented.
And there's everyone's getting up and dancing, so it's not just dancers as such. So
Oh, the other people have been doing
yeah, so it's good. Yeah, great.
etc.
It just reminds you of where today has come from, how people created these amazing vehicles and trains, and we saw an air museum with a complicated engine on display, and you just wonder how was that first thought up. Just amazing.
And it's just like the amount of young kids that would never have seen kids with it's a diesel train, so it was amazing to see that. Sadly, there was no steam, but again, there's an education there that you don't get, so it's great. And the amount of people tells the story, I think, really. The amount of people that are
I
here.
agree. There's people from all generations here right now, right?
Yeah. That would be 3801. And it goes back a long time because we moved from, my parents lived in Wollongong, but my aunt lived in Bexley. So we'd come up every fortnight, Dad's pay week, and she would catch a train into Central. But the idea from her nephews was to look out at Redfern and pick the green train, which was 3801, and it's just stuck, and it's so lovely. Yeah, so that's a memory of my aunt, but it's also a beautiful train.
It's great having it on a long weekend because you're free to come and do. And it just, even if you don't know about it, it's something to come across when you're travelling and you discover it. And in the past they've had the double-decker bus rides and all sorts of
Still there.
things. Oh, is it?
It's there. Yeah.
That's
still
going
is.
today?
Yeah.
All right. So it's not just confined here too. So
It's everything.
Yeah, and it's done so beautifully now here, but the heritage is still there as well. And my aunt used to always bring me to the wall over there. There's a nick in the marble wall, which is the only shot in World War One, and one of the army guys shot his rifle because he didn't want to go onto the thing. So, and that's the nick in the wall, which is still there. And we've been there and seen it. So
Oh, you go and check on it every time.
they haven't plastered it over.
My name's Jai.
And I'm Harry.
We are train enthusiasts.
To say the least.
To say the least, yes. We're out today enjoying the Transport Heritage Expo, which we're very lucky to have once a year, run by Transport Heritage. And me and Harry have known each other for what, 4 or 5 years now?
5 years, yeah.
And
went to school together.
Went to high school together, and we've been interested in this as long as I can remember. I think it's for me at least. And
Well, my interest goes back to this because my mum and dad used to run the heritage trains as a full-time job. I grew up basically on one of the steam engines that Transport Heritage owns. Well, yeah. Nah, it was pretty good. Just always being out on the engine when I was younger.
all right. Well, I run the NSWGR Train Spotter. I've been doing it since 2021. Picked it up using my phone and just going out and sharing what I enjoy, and then moved on. My grandfather gave me his HD video camera, and then my dad for my birthday bought me a 4K video camera. And my idea with my YouTube channel is my grandfather is getting sick, unfortunately, and he loves steam engines. He can't come out as much anymore, and he passed that passion on to me. And my hope is to be able to share that passion with other people who can no longer go out and see it. They can see it online and sit in their living rooms and just enjoy seeing steam trains run around on their television. Harry?
And my YouTube channel used to be called Harry's Train Vlogs. Now I've upgraded it to Next Rail Videos. I basically started my YouTube channel to do the same as Jai, just to share the moment with everybody. But I stopped it for a while because I had HSC and everything. And now that I'm back in the game, just out whenever I can with this guy, chasing, filming. So yeah.
If I was going to say, I think that it's important because a lot of us, like myself and Harry, who are still relatively young, we weren't around to see these magnificent machines operating during their heyday. And I think it's amazing, especially with steam engines, the sound, the smell, it's like a living creature. And unfortunately, we nearly lost that to time, but thanks to people who have saved them and are operating them at events like Transport Heritage Expo, we're able to share that passion with younger generations who unfortunately weren't around to see that in everyday life. You got some words?
And what, going on from what Jai said, just being out, like not even filming it, just taking a 5-minute walk up the street to go see it, getting to hear the whistle echoing, seeing like all the smoke, steam, having just that enjoyment of just reliving what our parents and their parents saw when they were kids. And the importance of this is like not just seeing it and writing it, but like getting to know a bit of the history about it and all the stuff.
Not the last thing, but basically the last thing I wanted to ask you is, do you guys have a favourite train type or particular engine or something?
Oh boy, that's a very difficult question. There is quite a couple. You start,
Okay, well,
so I can think.
Strictly speaking, if we're talking about looks, I reckon for looks, something streamlined is nice.
Oh, I know where this is going. We're going to get bombed by the 30.
Yeah, okay, 30. For me, growing up on 01, which is 3801, I love that. But if we're
Generic,
yes. But if we're talking, I have to say 5917.
Oh, that's a better choice.
It's a beautiful engine. It's built by Baldwin.
American?
Originally, it's American. They used to be freight engine. Now seeing it on rates like this, and just hearing that gorgeous whistle. Oof.
I happen to agree with Harry there. The 38 was definitely my favourite growing up. I think my grandfather was very fond of it as well. I think pretty much everyone's grandfather was very fond of that engine. It's a well-known engine. It's a beautiful machine. Unfortunately for me, it went out of service in 2007 and I was born in 2004. And it was out for 11 years. So I was about 14 years old when I first saw my favourite steam engine that I'd known about for 5 or 6 years, but had never actually seen in person. So I finally got a chance to actually see 3801 in person and I was gobsmacked. It was one of the coolest machines I've ever seen.
That's true.
But as of more recent years, I think I have to agree with Harry, the 59's taken my heart a bit. It's a rugged workhorse. It runs non-stop with very little issues and it's just a beautiful piece of machinery. Any steam engine's cool. Any steam engine, the sound of the hiss, the clank, the whistle, just who can complain? It's pretty cool.
Yes, but like going on that, out of those ones, 59 is just one. Something you don't see every day.
Yes, unusual.
Also have to say the 19 class is a beautiful loco.
I guess I'd just say thank you to all the heritage organisations out there that keep this running. East Coast Heritage, Transport Heritage New South Wales, Picnic Train, LVR, Zigzag Railway, Patterson Rail Museum, all of them for just keeping this alive for all of us. If it wasn't for them, and if it wasn't for the people who bought these engines when they were on the scrap rows on their last legs, poor young blokes like me and Harry wouldn't be out here getting to do this. So I guess just a massive thank you to everyone involved in saving them and keeping them in operation to this day, and hosting events like this, Transport Heritage Expo, where we can get out and have a good time and enjoy ourselves. So thank you.
Plus, it doesn't matter if you're an adult or a kid, seeing this stuff just brings out the inner child.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Yes, well, we're both doing the same thing, and that's that we have to deliver these, what are these things? These suitcases, this luggage, to a passenger who's lost them.
Yeah.
Yes, but we're here today to celebrate the actual 170th anniversary of steam.
That's right,
in New South Wales and Australia, I suppose. Yes. Not today. No, we're too busy waving goodbye to people and making sure that they get on and that all their luggage is delivered.
Yeah, I'm not allowed on the trains.
No, this one's not allowed on the trains.
Oh dear.
No, this one is a porter, a porter trainee really.
Yes.
It's been a trainee for a number of years. How many years has it been?
7 years.
7 years, yes.
I think maybe by year 25 I might graduate.
Well, that's year 25 now.
In 25, so 7 plus.
7 plus.
What's that?
Oh, right, I see what you mean. 232.
Yeah. 232.
Yeah, I would say that's getting there. Yeah,
think
maybe
so.
a bit optimistic, but yes. We certainly do, don't we?
Oh, yes.
We've seen it in the joy that it brings to people of all ages, families, children this size, children that size, and then adults as well. They've all get their enjoyment out of it, and little children are very excited about it. So I think it's a great event, and it puts us in touch with our heritage as well.
Yeah, I think there's something special about remembering the past and what things were like and where we've come from, and
It's true.
just the difference in our culture and the way that we dress, and getting to have a little blast into the past with the fashion, the outfits, the suitcases,
Yes.
the things you just don't see anymore, and
Yes.
the things that we sometimes take for granted because they didn't have wheels on suitcases.
No.
And now people can just roll them all around.
I know.
And things like that's really cool to just see how far
Yeah.
we've come. And then you can see all the steam trains, and then you see the contrast with all these new modern ones. And
Gee.
yeah, it's really interesting to
Very
just
good
reflect
answer.
on it.
Very good. Yes, and the thing is for us, we take this is normal for us, of course, you know, because we're like, I suppose, we've just sort of, we're a flashback from the past.
Yeah, it's really fun, I think, interacting with public, because sometimes they don't like us, but for the most part, everyone gets very excited to see people dressed up in character. A lot of the little kids get very excited to hold the bags, take a photo. It's like a little keepsake from the night and for the day, I suppose. It's like a little memory they can take interacting with us and having a bit of a laugh. And we do get lots of comments about people saying that
It makes for the day. An atmosphere
we
makes for
create
the
some
day.
of that atmosphere.
It does. We're instantly likable.
Oh yeah.
Even though I never smile, and even though I'm always telling this fellow off for dropping suitcases and things, people go along with it.
And I get asked for lots of pictures, so I've been working on my model faces and my angles, because
Yes.
everyone seems to want a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I'm oblivious. They just take a photo and I go, yes. And it stopped, yes. And that's it. It's all over, really.
The 3801.
This 3801 is probably my favourite.
Yeah.
But having said that, I really do like the steam engines, any of them. You know, that one that just went, what was that? The 3501. Yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah, so the steam trains are good. As long as you're not very, very close when they take off.
It's a bit loud.
Very loud.
Yeah.
It gets up your nostrils, but then you know you've been there. That's important.
But the charcoal exfoliates my skin as well, so it
Does.
keeps me really youthful.
Yeah. He's very, very conscious of his skin.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to say it's really well run. I know that we get a lot of support by the people that get us here, and that's Transport New South Wales, and especially the heritage people. Emma and all those people do a really, really good job of looking after us.
Oh, yes.
And all the other entertainers, and then all of the other staff as well, and the volunteers.
Coming last year brought us here today. We came last year just on spec, we knew it was on and wanted to see what it was like, and we quite enjoyed it last year and enjoyed seeing all the trains. So we thought, yeah, we'll come back again this year. But this year we booked to go on one of the train trips, whereas we didn't do it last year. It was good, only that we didn't go to where we wanted to go. But it was still a night. The guys were nice because they're all volunteers on the trains, and they were all very helpful and informative. But yeah, no, it was good. Very important. Yeah, I think we need to look after our history and look after things like these old trains and things like that. I mean, I think as time goes by, we're losing a lot of our heritage and losing a lot of our, in every way, buildings and yeah. So these events, any of these sort of events, are really, really important for the younger generations, and just to know about our history, basically. The steam trains, definitely. Definitely the old steam trains. I think they're just wonderful. I think it's just, just such a huge part of history, and, and they're just so beautiful, the way they're built and everything. Everything's built so to last, not like things that are built these days. I mean, even this old train, everything here is just so, definitely the steam trains.
Transport Heritage New South Wales had wanted to find an announcer, sort of like a commentator, station announcer. So I actually mainly do air shows. However, this is a number of railway events in the country have used my services as a air show announcer to bring sort of an enthusiastic voice to the event. And so Transport Heritage brought me here. I am a massive heritage transport enthusiast. I like all forms of heritage transport, from trains, buses, boats, planes, horse and cart, you name it. So they've brought me on as a MC, Master of Ceremonies and Station Announcer. So my main role is to communicate the events happening here at Transport Expo. So the trains that are running, ticket information, all the other events like the buses running. But also we have a number of music acts, so I'm essentially introducing them as well. So I'm essentially the voice sort of connecting all the events of Transport Expo. Well, depends what you mean by the musical acts or just what's on display here.
I'll take either.
Well, okay, the radioettes were really good. The way they sort of articulate their voices to mimic the Andrews sisters is really spot on. In terms of stuff here, I mean, I love all trains, buses and all that stuff. There is one bus out there on the forecourt. It's a West bus. So it's orange, red, brown. That was my childhood school bus when I was growing up in Penrith.
That exact bus?
Not the exact bus, but the company, the bus type, is essentially my childhood bus. So to see that in the flesh running and sounding exactly how I remember it as a child, to me, out of everything here, no offense trains, that is the best. No, I've not had a chance to do anything apart from talk. Very important, very important. It's not just having the trains, the vehicles, it's not having these machines run, because we need to see how they run, how they used to operate before the likes of our modern trains or buses and all that, but also how they connect with life. So with buses, most people relate to buses by their childhood and what they did for the suburb connectivity of communities and all that. Same with trains. Before airlines and all that stuff, trains were the way to travel around the state or interstate. And so we need to the younger generation need to understand how this stuff used to work back in the day. Definitely very important to maintain. And yeah, we need to keep events like this going. And plus everyone's having a great time, really. Each train that's on display here has a significant role it played in history. So, you know, from the XPT over there to the Southern Aurora train, if I'm going to really narrow it down, there'll be two. The CPH rail motor, the green and cream train there, those things are like absolute rockets, those things, and they did a lot for regional New South Wales. Really important, connecting a lot of rural communities to connect onto bigger centres or even the city. And still running on the network at the moment are the V-sets. They're the double-decker trains that travel out to Newcastle and Lithgow. They're still running out there in normal service, but yeah, that's my childhood train that I grew up with as well.
I'm also a big fan of the V-set.
Good, good. All right, so you know what I mean then. Yeah, so I haven't had time to see them go, but I mean, they're my favourite train. They took me out of the city into beautiful places outside of Sydney, you know, to escape. We need volunteers. We need volunteers to keep all this happening. We need volunteers to run the train, to clean the train, to restore the train. We need volunteers to crew the buses, to restore the buses, the boats, all that stuff. We need volunteers. If you're interested in this stuff, volunteering is a good way to make friends with like-minded interests, to meet new people, learn skills. It's the best thing you can do. Obviously volunteer when you can. We're all busy in our lives. But yeah, if I'm going to add anything to your thing, we need more volunteers. Join up, help us, have an awesome time.
I made a doco about trains, because who doesn't like trains, right? And I learned a lot while doing it. I'm supposed to be doing a documentary-specific class at the start of next year, so I'll be very excited to apply my knowledge from this film to the next film, regardless of whether I direct or not. Thank you again to everyone who was involved in the documentary, especially the interviewees and George's cameras. Without you, the documentary would literally have been impossible. I also want to thank Kaisa, who was a great help on the film and made the process infinitely easier. So, I hope you enjoyed that window into my non-analysis film life. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.